Nestor, are you there? I just added you. Yes. Good afternoon, Nestor. Welcome. I love starting an interview with technical difficulties.
Hey, pleasure to be
It's,
here. Thank you so much.
it's pretty great. Thanks for your patience, Nestor, and everyone in the audience. Thank you as well. So we're going to go ahead and get this started properly now that our guest is here. So I just introduced myself, Nestor. Will you do a quick introduction, and then I'm just going to share with our folks like how Bring It Home and Urban Homeworks connected, and then we'll get going.
Sounds great. My name is Nestor Jimenez, and I'm the campaign manager for the Bring It Home Minnesota campaign. I've been in this role since December, and I'm really excited to be working with so many folks. Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a privilege to be helping push for this transformative legislation.
Absolutely, Nestor. We're so glad that Beacon brought you on board. It's been really great to work with you. So really quickly, Bring It Home is new legislation. I think for most of our audience, folks have probably may or may not have heard of it. And I'll just give a little bit of background for the Urban Homeworks perspective that Lee Blondes, the executive director of Beacon Interfaith Housing, just set up a connection. We had a community connection. And through that connection, Lee started to share with me about this rent subsidy initiative called Bring It Home Minnesota. And as folks know, Urban Homeworks is a small affordable housing provider. We have 136 units of affordable rental housing, both in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And our focus in our rental housing is on folks making below 80% of the area median income. And so when Lee shared with me this initiative, I was incredibly excited and eager to be a part of it because we witness the impact every day of cost burden living and navigation and those in our housing. And so before we get too deep in the impact of this legislation, Nestor, will you just tell us what the heck is Bring It Home Minnesota? What is this legislation?
So it was introduced in 2019, and what Bring It Home Minnesota is really transformative legislation to fully fund the housing voucher system that exists right now. And what we're trying to do is utilize the existing infrastructure that, like, for example, Section 8 already provides it, and really fully fund it, where right now there are waiting lists that take like weeks, months, even years for families. We really want to change that, and fully fund it. It could help about 550,000 people in Minnesota, and really, it's so that people can pay no more than 30% of their income towards rent. And folks could qualify for this if they are earning less than the 50% AMI.
Got it. That's amazing. So I think what would really help make it tangible to folks is understanding if I'm a 50% AMI level renter, how exactly does this work for me?
Well, if you were to qualify, it's really based on your income, right? And so if you were to apply for to receive a rental assistance, and if you applied, you qualified, you then would not be placed in a waiting list, right? Because the program would actually be fully funded, so there would be funds for you to go immediately to address the crises that you're living through. But right now, that doesn't exist, right? There are waiting lists. You have to be like a preferred qualified person, be in the preferred list. And so it complicates a lot of different things when we could be doing something about it. And right when the crisis does happen, like, boom, here you go. Like you do qualify for this, then that means that you could get rental assistance.
That's great. That's amazing. And so am I limited in where I can choose to live with this legislation?
So for this, we are not setting it up that way. So there won't be any limitations on where you could live. It's pretty much in the free open market. So, if you already have an apartment, for example, that you're renting out through, and if that landlord does accept this, is signed up to take payments from rental assistance programs from the state, then that would allow you to qualify and stay there.
That's awesome. So I think one of the things that is probably helpful for folks listening, again, is for us to just make this as tangible as possible. And so if you go to the Urban Homeworks website, and I asked my team to just pop a link in the chat, there is a Bring It Home Minnesota calculator that will show you how much this legislation can actually impact the amount of money that you're paying on your rent monthly. And that will just make this really tangible. We looked at our, within our housing, within our rental portfolio, just to see, again, what percentage of our residents would benefit from this legislation. And it's more than 30% of our residents that would benefit from this. And so that's, amazing for us as an organization, again, always trying to help to stabilize the community through housing, through affordable rental housing. I think it'd be really helpful, Nestor, if you would be willing to share just kind of the background on Beacon kind of creating this or beginning this campaign.
Yeah, so it dates back before me. However, it's been that knowledge has been passed down, and really, it's because of a need that does exist. And back in 2018, 2019, there were many housing. The housing community came together and really brainstormed different needs that Minnesota needed to address. And one of those needs that kept coming up and up was rental assistance. And so we know that one of the best things, one of the best programs that is offered right now throughout, the United States is rental assistance that can elevate folks out of poverty, right? Other than Social Security. And so with that, Beacon had the resources and the capacity to really own the campaign and really start it up, and then create a vehicle for other housing organizations, the broader community, to join in and really push for this legislation. So that's really it came out of a need that the housing community really wanted to address.
Absolutely. And one of the most powerful things to me as a collaborator in this is that we are accessing organizations across the state, which means that this is bipartisan legislation. It is touching folks in rural Minnesota. It's touching folks in the suburbs, as well as in the urban areas, including the Twin Cities, which is where Urban Homeworks is. And so we're working to really meet across these political lines during a time where there's a lot of divide in our country. And with that in mind, Nestor, how are things moving? Where is the campaign at today?
So right now, and to give some background on the need, right? It affects every county in Minnesota. Rental, just folks not being able to afford their rents. People are affected, so it doesn't have a party line or a district line. So, we see quote unquote legislative districts that are controlled by both Republicans and Democrats and beyond that are affected. So we definitely need champions from all political parties, affiliations, to really step up and really try and work with Bring It Home Minnesota as a campaign to really pass this for their constituents. We have right now a large opportunity, right? It's because we have a lot of public money available. This 2022 session.
$9.25 billion, right?
Exactly.
That's
yeah.
No
So
small chunk of change.
It is not. And so we can totally do something with that pot of money. Now, one of the obstacles that we're we're really touching on is that it hasn't been a priority for a lot of folks, right? And the COVID pandemic has really made it very clear that some systems don't, like the systems already in place don't really work for folks. Especially, I mean, if you have a family and you have kids, right? And like school is happening at home, that makes it very complicated. But going back to where we are right now in the session, so it is a legislative campaign, and we are working very diligently with legislators. Unfortunately, this right now, we have run into like a roadblock because we're not included in both the Senate or the housing omnibus bills. So that is something that is really important for folks to really understand, that this campaign is pushing for very bold and big transformative change that is not going to happen in a year or 2 years, but it's going to happen for the long term. Like, we have to keep fighting and working together, collaborating with different regions of the state to really push forward this large, transformative policy. And so that's where we are right now. We have to keep on building and really keep meeting with folks. We definitely want to meet with Senate Majority Leader Jeremy Miller. We want to meet with Governor Walz, right, to really, as a campaign, to talk about these issues. We have met with Speaker Hortman, and absolutely, I would take another meeting with her again, right? However, we definitely want to introduce ourselves to these top leadership and really let them understand that the need is there and we need to address it as soon as possible.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about, over 500,000 Minnesotans benefiting from a particular legislation that costs about $1 billion, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe is about 3%, just 3% of our state budget. So I'm going to just repeat that for folks listening, that this is legislation that would support over 500,000 Minnesotans from the top of the state to the bottom of the state, no region or area excluded. It would cost $1.1 billion to cover every household that is 50% below the area median income and currently paying over 30% of their 30% of their income on housing, which means that they are cost burdened. Takes 3%, y'all, of the state budget to solve this issue today. $1.1 billion of $9.25 billion in surplus. So Nestor, if folks are really vibing off of what we're talking about right now, if they're hearing what I'm saying about how little it costs to get over 500,000 families out of survival, right, and into a state of thriving where they can make better decisions for themselves, for their children, and it only costs $1.1 billion. They're hearing the words that I'm saying and they're like, why aren't we doing this? What should they do? How can they help advocate for this legislation?
Absolutely. And there has been a fiscal note update, so it does cost a little bit more. So it used to be 1.1, but with rising costs and whatnot and updated formulas, it is about $1.5 billion. And again, it would take about 3 to 4% of the whole state budget to really fund this, right, on a yearly basis. So you're absolutely right there.
But we have to. But I do want to. For those who will say, "Oh, it's $1.5 billion," I had to smile because that, y'all, $1.5 billion, just over 500,000 Minnesotans out of crisis. 3% of the annual budget. What do they do? How do they get on board?
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I think it's really getting involved. You know, getting involved through Urban Homeworks, through the campaign, and utilizing this campaign to really go to the Capitol, talk to legislators, and really voice out their concerns. Right? It's, I mean, we know that uh, rental assistance does help folks. It's a known thing. So it's tested, and we know that utilizing the current structures right now that we want to like execute, bring it home through work, right? And we want to use it through the urban, or excuse me, the housing authorities throughout, like city, county, like housing authorities. Um, and so it's not something that is like, I mean, it can become complicated, but they have been doing it for many, many years. And that's the vehicle that we want to use. Now, being active is very important, right? Talking to your legislators, running for office, right? In support of Bring It Home, because you know that this legislation is key to building a, a great pillar for a great foundation for the lives of all Minnesotans. Um, I mean,
Yeah, so I really appreciate that. We are looking to work with the institutions and systems that already exist, that have proven over time to funnel out resources to families well, and relying on those systems to bring in added support again for those 500,000 folks in our state. And so Nestor, like, I'm a everyday citizen. I'm not going to go to the Capitol because that's not in my day to day. How else can I get in touch? How else can I make my voice heard on this legislation?
yeah, there are many ways, and legislators do have phone numbers. They do have emails. So if you want to, you can also write them letters, and really explaining why this legislation is so important to you, your family, your neighbors, your sisters, right? And your personal story is so critical, right? Because sometimes as a legislator, you're so focused on passing laws, like talking to so many of your different constituents, that you're you can't really understand everything that is happening in your district. So folks, I mean, you have a voice, right? At the end of the day, they will have to at least like listen to you and understand like what the issue is about, because they're public servants. Folks can vote them in and vote them out. Um, and
Absolutely.
you have to realize how powerful you are, and your stories are very powerful.
And this is an election year, so this is very timely conversation about the power of the voices of the people. We have an opportunity this year to vote with our voices, and to vote with our values, right? And so that's what I'm hearing in what you're saying, Nestor, that now is a great time for folks who either would benefit from this legislation or advocates and allies of those folks, right? Like, those are our neighbors, those are our family members. Your voice and advocacy can be just as powerful as the voices of those with those experiences themselves. And the more that we take the time to call and email in advocacy, the louder our collective voice becomes. So we highly encourage you to pick up the phone, look up, you can quickly Google your legislator, and legislators, and see specifically who you should call, who will want to listen to your voice because it's relevant to the elections and them representing you. And shoot them an email. Sometimes phone calls are hard, COVID, introversion, that's fine. But for those of you that feel like you're ready to like leave a message because they likely won't pick up, also feel free to call as well. There's a couple of other ways that folks can get involved that are even, I think, a little bit more removed than taking that very active step which some folks might not feel like they're ready for. There's a couple things coming up, both with Urban Homeworks and Beacon, supporting the Bring It Home legislation. And so I know that we've got a rally, right, on
That's
April
right.
19th. Can you talk a little bit about that rally?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have some great speakers, folks that have been directly affected, so they have lived through this housing insecurity, and I think it's very important for folks to really understand like what people go through and the impact that can have. It has ripple effects on people's lives. So we'll have folks from that realm. We also will have housing leaders really talk about why Bring It Home is so important to them and their organizations, and if they have been directly impacted as well, and what really is helping them like move and truck along through this session. It'll be a great opportunity for folks to really be at the Capitol, and really get to meet other folks that are in this movement. And so really there's that like solidarity that does exist when you show up to events. And we're slowly coming back into being in person for some of these events. And this one is going to be, or happens to be, one of those, right? And it's going to happen on April 19th from noon to 1 p.m. at the state capitol, and the South Steps. So we hope to really see as many people as possible to turn out, and really, it's to showcase how Bring It Home is serious, how it's a serious issue, and legislators, top leadership, Senate Majority Leader Jeremy Miller, Governor Walz, and Speaker Hortman need to really take a look and understand that this issue can impact a lot of lives and can be, it can totally change the landscape of like this housing instability that we have been living through, and we don't want it anymore. I think there are resources available, and if there's a need and if there's a will, then we can find a way to do it and implement it. And that's what we need them to really understand about this legislation.
Is that we have the will.
Exactly.
Absolutely, we have the will. And then after the 19th, we, Urban Homeworks, are hosting a Bring It Home Minnesota forum on April 21st at, I believe, 7 p.m. And I think the team is posting about that in the chat as well. And I also saw that a legislative map was posted so folks can check on their legislators really quickly. And for that forum, we'll be inviting Nestor back alongside of some of our representatives and bringing together voices, exactly what you're speaking to, Nestor, bringing together voices that are directly impacted by whether or not Bring It Home is passed. And again, just to elevate the reality that inaction is still action. If we don't pass this legislation, we are continuing to say that we are okay, that we have neighbors that are living cost-burdened lives, that are in survival. This is really a powerful opportunity. And it only costs us $1.5 billion. I would say, even if it costs us $2 billion, Nestor, out of our state budget, that is a worthy use of a state's dollars. I can't see the chat at all, which is really a bummer. And so I just want to ask my team if there are questions in the chat, if you could send them to me in the way that we've been communicating, I will be able to see that, just to make sure we don't miss any audience voices out there. Nestor, is there anything else that you want to relay to folks that have joined us this afternoon?
So I am having technical issues, so I'm gonna log out and log in real quick, okay?
Sounds good. I can sit here and smile at the audience while you do that. So while Nestor is dealing with his technical difficulties, I'm just going to relay again that this legislation covers over 550,000 Minnesotans. That is 550,000 Minnesotans who are making less than their area's area median income. And area median income works by county. So of course, every county is different across the state. But regardless of which county you live in, if you are making less than 50% of the AMI of that region, Bring It Home Minnesota would ensure that you are not paying more than, I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure he could get in. You are not paying more than 30% of your resources on housing. We know, those of us that follow the economy, those that are thinking about our own budgets and financial wellness, that if you're paying more than 30% of your take-home pay, and actually AMI doesn't address take-home pay, it's your gross versus your net. So think about that as well. But we know that if you're paying more than your net income on your housing, that really strains the rest of your budget. And in particular, if you're making less than 50% of the area income, your budget is already strained. And people have really been hustling again and surviving. And so this is an opportunity for us statewide to say we care about our neighbors. We want them to remain our neighbors. And we want them to be able to do so in a healthy way that allows them to really fully engage in our communities. Nestor, I was just kind of reiterating for folks while you were transitioning back in. And so some questions that I want to make sure we address is just about rent vouchers. And again, because this legislation is a rent voucher focused legislation, maybe if you could speak to, the concern that landlords won't accept rent vouchers. Like, how do you respond to folks that bring that question to you?
Yeah, there have been a lot of it is true, landlords have preferred not to take like federal rent vouchers in the past, but that experience is not universal. But we have noticed that many families on newer state-run rental assistance programs have not had this challenge. So really, it depends on the landlord and how warm they receive this new type of program.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it gives every landlord the opportunity to accept it, to be a part of this transformational change, which is in and of itself exciting. I see we have a question from Dan. We see homelessness a lot in the cities, but also know it's a big concern in rural and small town areas. What would we tell rural legislators about the need for Bring It Home? Great question, Dan.
Yeah, that is a great question. And, a lot of the conversations that we've been having with, housing authorities, like city, county, or regional housing authorities, is that like some of the most like cost burden folks are coming from rural areas and these small towns. And because these housing authorities are not fully funded, they can't really allocate as much money into those communities. So it's really, we need to really push forward on this, on these facts, right? Folks really need to tell their legislators, communicate with their legislators that these areas are also very much deeply affected. There is every county, every legislative district in the state of Minnesota has some amount of folks or people that are cost burdened by paying over 30% of their income towards rent.
Absolutely. Which is why the coalition of folks that you all have brought together spans literally the state, including some of the most rural areas that we have here, um, as well as suburbs. Are you able to give folks a glimpse, just any indication of the kinds of rural organizations a part of this movement, or any numbers on that, just to help folks have a little bit more of that kind of context for the support for this?
Yeah, so not too long ago, we started working with Reverend Danielle Bartz, and she is from the First Congregational Church of Winona. And so it is such an interesting, Winona is such an interesting case because it's it's a fairly small or larger town, city, but at the same time, it has a university system. So So really, you're seeing that rental affordability for like students is like not really like reachable. It's really expensive to rent over there. So you have landlords that are raising their rents and whatnot based on the need, right? Um, and so it's leaving a lot of folks behind that need like less expensive rental housing units. So we need to be able to adjust to the market rates that are happening and really support those folks that are cost burdened in
Absolutely.
those places.
Absolutely. And I think that response actually feeds well into Dylan's question, which is, do we have enough homes for Bring It Home? And, I can just add on to what you said, Nestor, is that the homes exist and people are living in them. The reality is that we want to keep them in the homes because ultimately it costs the state more money to support homelessness, to people that are unhoused. And so if we can keep families in the homes that they're in, then that has a greater benefit for the entire community, economic benefit for the entire community. And so that's a great question. I don't know if, Nestor, you want to add anything to that specific question around having enough housing, essentially.
Yeah, that's a great question from Dylan. And to what you said, so we can support policies that build more homes, and at the
Mhm.
same time support renters that are paying too much right now for their rent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, y'all, $1.5 billion is 3% of the state budget. There's room for more. But we know that when families are stabilized in their homes, young people experience greater educational outcomes because they're stable in their schools and their school communities, which is additional resources for low-income families. When you know your community, when you're well-versed in the resources accessible to you, you take advantage of them. And that leads to greater outcomes for you as an adult. So it really does get at deep systemic need. And here in the Twin Cities, we know that the majority of folks in our housing, not in urban homeworks housing, in houses in the Twin Cities are renters, right? Both Minneapolis and St. Paul are predominantly renter cities. And we know that the majority of those renters are Black and Brown. And so this legislation, at least locally, has significant racial impacts. The rural community is not my personal expertise, so I don't know, again, if Nestor, you're able to speak to the racial equity in those spaces as well.
I mean, it definitely, we're talking like, I mean, this shift, right, that we see in the legislature about like, yes, like we need to create more homeowners and more homes, etc. Like, yes, absolutely. I think that's right. Let's solve and like tackle that racial disparities and those racial wealth gaps that do exist, and they are systemic, and they've been happening ever since, right? But we also have to understand that there is a transition time when you experience like a crisis. You're in this like trauma mode where it's really hard to like, I mean, you can't go from losing your job, for example, and like not being able to afford your home to then like now you're gonna become a homeowner. that transition like takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we need is an immediate response, right? That isn't temporary. It's not an emergency thing that the state has to like go about. We need a permanent solution, and that has a universal component to it, like Bring It Home, where we can allow folks that breathing room that you need. You know, something happens to you, you want that breathing room. Like, okay, great, there's this pillar right here. I will be able to afford my rent for next month. And then, okay, great. Are there systems in place where I know that I want to become a homeowner? Let's go. Let's get to that point. But now I just need to like recollect myself. And that's where folks like really need to understand that there is a stable transition time. You know, mental health, trauma recuperation. So we have to remain aware of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, housing is definitely a pipeline or a spectrum. And to your point, one of the beautiful things about this legislation is it gives folks space to start saving and to actually accumulate wealth, so that they even can consider things like becoming homeowners and stable homeowners that remain in their
That's right.
homes, right? So
That's
this
right.
is touching on many aspects of that spectrum that all in all advance community wellness as a whole. Again, we think about families in stable communities and the impact that that has on educational outcomes for the children in that household, sometimes even the adults in that household, the capacity for that household to have access to better food and health care resources. And so these are all things that Bring It Home would allow low-income families to do and to start to think about. We have an interesting question from Azad, and I know the answer to this question, but I also just really like the question. And Azad asks, is there any movement or policy on requiring landlords to accept the vouchers? And so right now there is not, but I think what I like about that question, the reason why I'm naming it out loud is because as a collaborative, that's an important, that is an important thing for us to consider, to start to work on, is how we can encourage landlords to do the right thing and to accept, because the money is the same, right? Like if you accept a voucher, you're not taking less rent. And so there's really only bias that prevents people from accepting things like vouchers, bias and assumption, right? You don't have to lower your rent. So the argument of how it impacts your own economics is not an accurate argument. So we'll continue to work on that. And thanks for raising that up, Azad. It's a really great question. So I think that is all I'm seeing coming through. We have about 10 minutes. And so I just want to remind folks that if you want to learn more about this movement, you can go to the bringithomeminnesota.org page. So it's literally bringithomeminnesota, one word, .org. That'll take you right to the website. And if you put in /facts, it'll bring up any remaining questions that you might have. But in general, I would say hang out on the page, read a little bit about who's a part of this movement. Again, it is a statewide initiative, and we do have some legislative support that is significant. And so we're just working to continue to build on that support and really make our voices loud. Like Nestor said, we need to demonstrate that as a people, as a state, we have the will because we have the resources. So that's not the question. The question is this important enough to the base of constituency in the state for us to advocate and fight for it? And so that's what we're asking you to do, those of you joining us today, is to advocate for your neighbors and family members and advocate for yourself. Any last words from you, Nestor?
Yeah, no, I think you definitely are spot on just like really activating yourself and really fighting for your neighbor. get involved as much as you can, right? Calling on your legislators and really like making it a point that we need this. And it's not a problem on money right now, because we know that there's a surplus and there's public money available for this. We have to find creative solutions to really address this and to really figure out like how to really implement this from a monetary perspective or point of view, because we know and we have a plan to execute this through the current system. So we're not inventing anything new. We're just fully funding the unmet need that Minnesota has.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Really appreciate that, Nestor. And with that, we are going to say goodbye and hope that you all enjoyed the last 10 minutes of your lunch hour. Thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate the conversation and the questions. Continue to bring them. Remember that there is a rally on April 19th and a forum, a panel forum on April 21st. And links to information about both of those events are in the chat. We look forward to walking with you in this journey. In solidarity, have a great day. Peace.
Thanks, Ellen. Peace.
Thanks, Nestor.